All right, we do have breaking news. The United Nations top court, the International Court of Justice, has just ordered Israel to immediately halt its military offensive in Rafah. Now, this is unlikely to have any practical impact. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been invited to address the U.S. Congress. The exact date of that is unknown, but the invitation is dividing some Democrats, with some planning to boycott the visit.
It's a terrible idea. No, I won't go.
Breaking news from the International Court of Justice, which just released its order calling on Israel to halt its offensive in Rafah. However, the court doesn't have a way to really enforce its decision, but the ruling comes as Israel is expanding its ground operations in that southern Gaza city and facing increasing isolation in the international community over its military conduct. And there's new urgency around reaching a ceasefire deal as CIA Director Bill Burns heads to Europe to meet with Israeli and Qatari negotiators. Let's get right to NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez in Tel Aviv for us. Raf, what kind of significance does this ruling from the International Court of Justice hold?
So, Anna, this ruling is binding and it is final. And so if Israel does not comply with it, technically they are in breach of international law. But as you said, the court does not have an enforcement mechanism. And in the past, rulings of the ICJ have been ignored by Israel and by others. Now, if there is a dispute, this could go to the UN Security Council, which could, in theory, enforce this ruling. But Israel will be hoping that the United States would veto any measures there that the Security Council might take against it. But as you said, this leaves Israel more diplomatically isolated. It comes just a few days after the International Criminal Court said its prosecutor is seeking the arrest of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, accusing them of intentionally starving the civilian population of Gaza, an allegation that they deny. Prime Minister Netanyahu is right now meeting with members of his cabinet, formulating a response to this ruling by the International Court of Justice. Israel has said in the past it will not allow the court to end its war against Hamas in Gaza, and it sees this Rafah operation as absolutely critical to that war effort. Anna, there might be a little bit of legal wiggle room here. The court says Israel has 1 month to submit a report explaining how it is complying with the court's ruling. Israel might take the position that as long as this Rafah operation is done within the next month, it could say in that report that it has complied with what the judge has ordered. Anna.
But we're getting the reports that Israel is actually expanding its attack on Rafah as the CIA director heads to Europe for ceasefire talks. What more do we know just about the stakes of this moment?
So as you say, Anna, 800,000 Palestinian civilians have now been displaced from Rafah out of a total population about 1.6 million. Many of those are people who are already displaced from cities in the north. Now, the White House is saying that this is still within the lines that it set, that it wants Israel to refrain from launching an all-out offensive against the population centers. But Palestinians will tell you this feels like an all-out offensive to them. CIA Director Bill Burns heading to Paris. He's due to meet with the head of the Mossad spy agency, with the Prime Minister of Qatar, key negotiators in these long-running ceasefire talks. But Anna, we have seen this movie before where the CIA director heads to a capital in Europe, in the Middle East, trying to breathe new life into these talks. But they have been stalled since late November, and there isn't a lot of optimism right now. Anna.
But still, don't give up. Don't give up, I think, is the message they're sending. Raf Sanchez, thank you. College students across America are wrapping up their academic year, but on campus, unrest over the Israel-Hamas war is far from over. Hundreds of Harvard students walked out of their commencement ceremony yesterday, chanting "Free Palestine." And at UCLA, protesters clashed with police, briefly occupying an academic hall after another makeshift encampment was broken up. All this as their chancellor was across the country getting grilled by Congress about his administration's response to the violence that broke out on his campus weeks ago. Today, we're also keeping a close eye on the small British island territory of Turks and Caicos, where a court is expected to sentence the first of 5 Americans arrested for bringing ammunition onto the island illegally. Brian Hagerich of Pennsylvania was arrested in February when airport security found ammunition in his luggage when he tried to board a flight home with his family. He says he left it there accidentally. Now, under the island's strict firearm laws, Hagerich faces a 12-year minimum sentence unless the court grants an exception. American politicians are pushing for a do not travel advisory to the island that could potentially cripple its tourism-dependent economy.
Very briefly, have a question on whether the United States has any evidence at all that would substantiate the ICC prosecutors' specific allegations against Israeli leaders that they are using starvation as a tactic of war in Gaza, or exculpatory evidence for that matter, and if you would commit to releasing that information before any potential issuance of ICC arrest warrants.
Look, we made my position on ICC. You guys never keep the deal, but that's okay. We've made our position clear on the ICC. We don't recognize the jurisdiction of ICC the way it's being exercised, and it's that simple. We don't think there's an equivalence between what Israel did and what Hamas did.